Welcome to the Cambridge Financial Podcast with Bert Salazar, CEO at Cambridge Financial Partners, LLC. This podcast is all about tax-preferred retirement planning, economics, financial risk management, and achieving a risk-free and successful financial life. Now, your host, Bert Salazar. Bert Salazar. Bert Salazar.
Hey, good day, everyone. Welcome to another Cambridge podcast. This is actually episode 88 of your Tax-Free Life podcast channel. So I'm excited to be here with all of you as I do every single week. Today's episode is going to be a very interesting one because the title for this episode is the Mount Everest analogy of retirement. Let me repeat that. The Mount Everest analogy of retirement. So we're going to be discussing what happens if you want to train to climb Mount Everest, and then how do we make an analogy out of that when it comes to your retirement planning and your retirement distribution planning. Now, you would also wonder, why do I want to talk about Mount Everest? And obviously, I'm an avid reader. I love to read about mountain climbing. Although the only mountain climbing that I have ever done in my life was my time in the Marine Corps when I was in the 1st Marine Division out of Camp Pendleton, California. So we had to hump all of those mountains in Camp Pendleton, training exercises for the Marine Corps, and my MOS was 0311, so I was infantry, I was a grunt, and I was assigned to the 1st Marine Division. So that's about all the experience that I have regarding mountain climbing, but I'm an avid reader. I enjoy reading, and every time I read something of interest, I try to create some analogy that will make it easier for a lot of my financial clients to be able to understand different economic concepts and stuff like that. So I felt that this would be a very good one. You've probably heard me talking about the mountain climbing analogy and Mount Everest in other podcasts, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on this one, so I hope you're ready. Try to set aside your microphone, your cell phones and everything else that can keep you occupied, and let's see if we can pay attention to this, because this is going to change in the way you're going to look at retirement planning and retirement distribution planning, especially for those of you that are near retirement or preparing for retirement at this point in time. So one of the first things to consider is that retirement distribution planning is an art. It is not a bundle of financial products just waiting for activation by the American consumer. So it requires a lot of monitoring, economic straddles of guaranteed outcomes, and it also requires a careful eye of a retirement strategist capable of understanding economic principles and strategies and how to apply them to each and every one of you individually. So I am that advisor. I am a retirement strategist. I'm also a tax planner. So this is my specialty. This is what I do every single day of the week with the vast majority of my clients that reach out to me regarding retirement preparation and distribution and so forth. Another thing that you may wonder is, well, then why the Mount Everest analogy? Why not some other kind of analogy? And I think you will find the following. The Mount Everest analogy is a profound way of simplifying the complex process of retirement. So it's going to simplify your understanding of the process. So it's a great way for you to, make this analogy and read more about this analogy and kind of interpret this analogy the best that you could. B, it accentuates the differences between pre-retirement accumulation and post-retirement distribution. C, it addresses economic and eroding factors seldom discussed by traditional financial advisors in the marketplace. And D, it addresses economic and eroding pitfalls seldom identified by the American public. So when you take a look at this analogy as I'm going to walk you through it, I think it's going to give you a really, really good flavor, and it's going to give you the basis for you to have a better understanding at the end of this podcast of not only what it is that you need to do in order to prepare adequately for retirement, but also you're going to be able to dig deep into the complexities of retirement, which may be something that you haven't thought about in quite some time. So let's say that you want to climb Mount Everest at some point in time in the future. The big question is, well, what do you do? Well, I would argue that the first thing that you would do is you would probably train and get in good climbing shape for at least a year. You may want to climb some local mountains in the area that you live, whether you live inside the United States or outside the United States. You would probably want to find sponsors that would help you with the cost of travel and access to the mountain. By the way, the average cost of climbing ranges anywhere between $30,000 and $55,000, and it takes anywhere between 45 to 70 days of getting prepared and getting to the mountain and getting acclimated to the different levels before you can actually try to climb the mountain. And the cost of $30,000 to $55,000 depends on the type of team that you're going to be joining and the climbing permits, because obviously, whenever you get there, you have to make certain you get a climbing permit before they would allow you in the mountain. You're also going to have to hire a guide. In the climbing world, especially Mount Everest, they call them Sherpas. So you're going to have to hire a Sherpa in order to take you to the top of the mountain. The average cost for a Sherpa could be anywhere between $8,000 to $12,000, depending on their level of experience and how many climbs or successful climbs they have had in the past. And last but not least, you would acquire the best equipment that money can buy, as this would be and I repeat, the climb of a lifetime. So far so good. Now let's go ahead and address some factual information about Mount Everest that I think is going to bring some value to our conversation today. It is the highest mountain in the world, and it sits at 29,029 feet, so it's quite high. Over the past few decades, over 280 people or climbers have actually died on the mountain. There are approximately 120 frozen bodies that have never been recovered from the mountain, and lost almost 70%. And this is very, very critical for all of us to understand, not only when it comes to climbing Mount Everest, but also when we apply this to the retirement distribution strategy that we'll talk about in the next few minutes. But almost 70% of all 280 deaths occurred on the way down, not on the way up. And you would wonder why. Well, we'll talk a little bit about that. So now that I have walked you through some of these statistics, how excited are you? Well, I would imagine you're pretty excited. I knew that you would. But now as you sit around and you're interviewing the Sherpa, what if the Sherpa you're interviewing prior to the climb tells you that, he can get you to the top of the mountain, but he's not sure whether he can get you back down safely? I think the big question to all of you listening to this podcast is, would you hire him or would you hire that Sherpa? The answer would be probably not. You see, the goal for the vast majority of people climbing Mount Everest is to get to the summit. But that's only half of the goal. The real goal is to make it all the way to the summit and then all the way back down safely after reaching the summit, so you can tell the story to all your family members. You may even want to write an article or a book about that. So it's not necessarily to get to the summit, it's to safely get to the summit, but most important, to make it back safely. And again, 70% of the people that have attempted to climb Mount Everest and that have actually died on the mountain did not die on the way up, they actually died on the way down. Now, retirement planning works exactly the same as climbing Mount Everest. See, climbing the mountain deals with the accumulation years of 30 to 40 years prior to retirement. So as you're climbing the mountain, if you start to make that paradigm shift and think about climbing Mount Everest as preparing for retirement, as you're climbing the mountain of retirement over a 25, 30, 40-year period, it's all about your savings rates, how much money you're setting aside on an annual basis toward retirement, the accumulation rates, what kind of rate of return are you receiving on your investments? Your investment diversification, so obviously you don't want to have all of your eggs in one basket. And because of that, obviously asset allocation during your accumulation years and during the years that you're climbing your retirement mountain are very, very critical from a business standpoint. Reaching the summit equates reaching your retirement goal, whether that would be age 62, age 65, age 70. Each and every one of you may have a different goal altogether. Now, coming down the mountain deals with retirement distribution. So once you get to the summit, once you get to your retirement goal, then now you're going to start coming down the mountain on the other side. And that's what we call retirement distribution planning. So coming down the mountain, once again, deals with retirement distribution, which may last 3 decades. By the way, that's not far-fetched at all. I actually have a name for the 3 decades. I call it the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years, and we're not going to get into that right now, but it's very important to understand that you have to be able to plan for at least 3 decades in retirement. Now, on the way down the mountain, or as part of your retirement distribution planning, it is no longer about savings rates, accumulation rates, investment diversification, and asset allocation. Now it's about distribution rate. How much can you take out of your assets on a safely mode basis to make certain that you don't run out of money before you run out of life? It's about longevity planning. It's about having income guarantees, and the vast majority of the retirees I deal with on an annual basis, they want more and more guarantees than they ever thought they wanted to. You see, when you're preparing for retirement, you don't pay much attention to guarantees. But once you get to your retirement summit and you start coming down on the other side of the mountain, it's all about guarantees. It's also about inflation hedging. You want to make certain that the income that you're going to be receiving in retirement has the ability to stay ahead of inflation. It's about risk management, and that's a very, very critical part of your Mount Everest retirement analogy, because you have to make certain that you manage your retirement distribution planning through a risk management approach. And then last but not least, you have to consider long-term care planning, which is one of the premier risks that all of us are going to have to deal with at some point in time in the future. Now, notice that in the retirement distribution part, or coming down the mountain, I did not mention rates of returns, investment diversification, or asset allocation during those critical years. Now, you may wonder why. Well, the reasons are the following. Number one, the rules of engagement totally change when you go from accumulation of assets to distribution of assets. See, there's a big, big difference between accumulation and distribution. Number two, the vast majority of Americans continue to apply the same parameters to their retirement distribution planning as they did to their accumulation planning. And that's why the vast majority of Americans are going to fail in retirement miserably. They're actually going to die halfway down the mountain. Number 3, no wonder most Americans are financially dead, even prior to reaching the summit of retirement, because they just don't know how to plan for it, because they have used a micromanagement approach or a microscopic view of retirement as opposed to a telescopic view of retirement, which would give them a really, really strong view as to what to consider and how to manage risk in retirement. Number 4, most of the retirement assets are in the tax-deferred bucket and highly exposed to changing tax environments. And that's one of the major challenges that I have with our new clients that come and join our firm. When I do an audit on everything they've done for retirement, the vast majority of them, all of their assets are in the tax-deferred bucket. 401ks, IRAs, SEPs, 403bs, the money that they put in is pre-tax, the money grows tax-deferred. But then at time of retirement, everything coming out of that bucket is going to be fully taxable. And obviously, based on our tax environment and what we foresee coming down the pike in the future, there's a very high probability that these people are going to be in a much more higher bracket in retirement, tax bracket in retirement, than they are or that they were prior to retirement. But because of the fact that they don't have any safety net and they don't have a shield to protect them and their families from a rising tax environment, they're obviously going to die halfway down the mountain because they are going to run out of money before they run out of life. Number 5, most of the retirement assets were never designed for cash flow. They were designed for accumulation. And remember, when it comes to retirement distribution planning, it's all about cash flow. Obviously, I do quite a bit of business with public employees, public safety. You know, I have a number of clients that are FBI, DEA, Customs, NCIS, local municipalities, law enforcement, and so forth. And the vast majority of these people are actually, they sit at the top 1% of the food chain. Why? Because all of them have a guaranteed pension. Now, once they choose that guaranteed pension income, they don't have access to the principal that is generating that pension income. All they have access to in a guarantee is to the pension income that's coming in on a monthly basis and then obviously on an annual basis. Now, all these public employees have to do is wake up on the green side of the grass every single day, and life for them is going to be adequate and is going to be better than most Americans because of the fact that there's going to be a paycheck until the day they die. So they're not going to run out of money before they run out of life. Now, they can make some bad financial mistakes and pay the price accordingly, but as long as they live, there's going to be a pension income coming into their household. Therefore, number 6 would be most of the retirement assets possess no cash flow and or income guarantees. Now, does that mean that if you don't have a pension and you don't work for a company that provides a pension, that you cannot put together a pension distribution plan for you and your family? Of course not. Yes, you can. You know, you do have the ability to create guaranteed cash flow and guaranteed income for life if you so desire. The question is, well, how much money are you going to put aside to buy that pension income? Do you want that pension income just to protect you and provide income to maintain the fixed expenses that you have in your household and not your variable expenses? Do you have that guaranteed pension income to provide for fixed expenses and also an increase in inflation in order to cover some minor additional cost? Or do you want that pension income to cover the entire spectrum, not only your fixed expenses, but all the other expenses that you may have depending on whether you happen to be in your go-go years, slow-go years, or no-go years of your retirement life. So depending on how it is that you want to set it up, there are vehicles available in which you would have the ability to create a similar pension distribution plan like many of these public safety employees and public employees have enjoyed for many, many years along those lines. Number 7, retirement assets are usually not protected from eroding factors. And what are those eroding factors? Well, there are 10 of them, but I'm just going to mention a few. Taxes, inflation, stock market volatility, interest rate volatility, propensity to consume, lawsuits, etc. Number 8, retirement assets are not protected and fully exposed to, and they're fully exposed to long-term care issues in retirement. For those of you that may not know this, if you have a healthy 65-year-old couple retiring, there's a 70% probability that one of them is going to have a long-term care need at some point in time in the future. That's an enormous probability. That's a very, very high probability. Other than the probability of death, which is 100%, that is the highest next probability that all of us are going to be dealing with at some point in time in retirement. A 70% probability. Now, that causes all kinds of different problems along the way. What are some of those problems? Well, if you have a need to enter into a long-term care facility or you need to have home health care, the additional expenses, unless you're properly protected, the additional expenses are going to have to come out of your retirement assets. So that means that you're going to have to accelerate the distribution of your retirement savings and investments in order to cope with the additional cost of expenses. Point number 9 would be most retirees plan for retirement with offensive tools, but no defensive tools. And that's very critical to understand. See, think of it this way. In a football game, offense usually puts people on the stands, but defense actually wins Super Bowls. So most good Super Bowl teams like the New England Patriots or the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Dallas Cowboys of the old and so forth, they had a very strong offense, but they also had a very, very strong defense. The challenge with the vast majority of Americans in preparation for retirement, as they're climbing the mountain of retirement in order to get to the summit, it's all about accumulation and savings rates. It's about asset allocation. They're not planning for the risk management of dying too soon, living too long, living with a disability, living with eroding factors like the ones that I just mentioned. So many times when one of these risk factors actually affects them, then obviously they're totally naked and they're totally unprotected from a business perspective. And then last but not least, and that would be point number 10, if you want to succeed in retirement, you need to let your defense become your offense in your retirement distribution planning. And that's extremely important. When we do tax planning and retirement distribution planning for many of the clients that we engage for the first time, we take a look and we have an offense and a defense, and we draw it on a board. And then we add all the things that the clients have done from an offensive standpoint in order to get them to where they're at today. And then we go to the defenses. We call this a T accounting. So we do a T, and then on one side we put the pros, on the other side we put the cons. And what we find more often than not is that on the defensive side of the house, there's not much there. Now, what are some of the things that you can do from a defensive standpoint? Well, obviously, you need to, number one, make sure that you're talking to somebody who's a retirement strategist and a tax planner that can help you navigate all of the major risks that all of you are going to have to face at some point in time in the future. Again, I already talked about it. the risk of dying too soon, the risk of living too long, coming down the mountain, running out of money before you get to the bottom of the mountain from a retirement perspective. That's a major problem that all of us are facing. Why? Because Americans are living a lot longer today than ever before. So if you don't have guaranteed income and guaranteed cash flow, that could be, by the way, guaranteed cash flow could be from, guaranteed annuities, immediate annuities. It could be from real estate, rental income that you have coming in on a guaranteed basis. Those are things that are very, very critical for all of you to start to consider and diversify. Most of you, I would argue, have the vast majority of your retirement assets inside 401ks, IRAs, 403b, SEPs, profit sharings, other types of pensions, and so forth. And obviously, you have very little control of that, and you don't have the access to those funds whenever you have the ability to gain some benefits because you have great opportunities in front of you from a business perspective. Now, normally, what I would recommend, if you find yourself that this is something that you definitely want to consider moving forward, because of the fact that you feel that this podcast is bringing some ideas and analogies to the forefront that you haven't really thought through as you prepare for retirement, is, feel free to give me a call. You can either call me at 786-766-1042, again, 786-766-1042, or you can email me at Bert, B-E-R-T, at GablesTaxGroup.com, and I'll be more than happy to schedule a 30-minute conference call or video conference call with each and every one of you and discuss this further. Now, for all of you, since each and every one of you has done something different, the answers may be totally different than from someone else. So, it may be apropos for you to put together a customized tax planning blueprint, which is something that I specialize in doing in my company. So again, just take me up on this. Send me an email, reach out to me. All of you are sending me emails on a regular basis with different questions, once you listen to my podcast. So I appreciate that quite substantial, because, the fact that all of you are listening to my podcast and that you're sending questions, asking for additional information, it makes me feel really good from a business perspective, because it means that I'm providing knowledge and information that you're taking with you and that you are assimilating and that you're trying to understand. So again, a tactical retirement blueprint may be suitable for all of you, so feel free to reach out. And I want to leave you with one final thought. That is one that I leave you with every time that I do, one of these podcasts on a weekly basis. And is that the goal of my firm and my goal, like I did in this podcast that we just covered now regarding the analogy of Mount Everest in comparison to retirement, my goal is to help each and every one of you change the way that you see things, because when you change the way that you see things, the things that you see change. So again, thanks very much for giving me a few minutes of your time today. I hope you enjoyed our topic, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week. Take care and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.